Sada bih prešao na ovaj.
I'd like to move on to the relationship I wanted to discuss at some length. That is to say, the existence of influence and control within the parallel chains of command. The OTP, in this case, regarding command responsibility, had to face the jurisprudence, encountering a significant obstacle. Namely, how to charge Perišić without compromising their own thesis of the responsibility of certain people in the chains of command of the VRS and the SVK. They had the dilemma of how to establish a thesis on the responsibility of Commander Perišić when they already had existing indictments against Mr. Karadzic and Mr. Martic, and the prosecution to assert that Mr. Perišić was not their subordinate. It is not in question. Their impossible mission they formulated in the indictment by forwarding a thesis that Perišić delegated the so-called operational control to Mladić and Čeliketic as well as Novaković in paragraphs 6 and 35 of the indictment, and that his command responsibility was, as they say, parallel to Karadzic's, which is what they said in their opening statement and at transcript page 379 and 380, as well as in their final brief. In the final brief, they articulate the concept in paragraph 804, where they say that there was this unique situation in which we found ourselves in this case. In the army, commanding is the gist, the prerequisite of the functioning of the system. There is an order which needs to be obeyed. You asked about that, Your Honor, and this is how I understand the thesis of the parallel chain of command. There is no army in the world which is based on a parallel chain of command. The prosecution know that, and then they created the concept of the so-called administrative control, trying to compare this still unique case to an existing model.
Expert
Malvin did not help the prosecution in that regard. There's absolutely no correlation that could compare NATO or the Allied concepts with our case. I say our case because we're all familiar with it. In this case, an officer left an orderly, structured military system, entering fully and completely another organized system. He is assigned his position in the other system, his only and single superior, who promotes him, who commands him in any respect. He also enters a completely regulated system of military discipline and military judiciary, and we know it functioned. The prosecution asserts so as well, because they state that Karadzic could have initiated disciplinary procedures against his subordinates in the VRS. In the final brief, it seems to us that the prosecution gave up on the assertion put forth in the indictment. That is to say that Perišić delegated operational control to the commanders of those armies, because there's simply no evidence to that extent. There isn't a single shred of evidence to show that he delegated such control to Mladić, Mrkšić, Čeliketic, and Novaković, as asserted by the prosecution in the indictment. We discussed it in detail in our brief, in several paragraphs, and I will tell you what they are. It is 148, 1454, 858, 985, and 995. Let me add something else. In a single chain of command, there could be several superiors exercising direct or indirect effective control, and they can bear the responsibility, but not outside the chain. Armies are structured and function in a way so as to obey one superior. If that does not work, the army does not work. What it looks like in real life, rather than in an isolated lab, can be seen if we look at the Zagreb charges. Could we please move into private session for that?
May the chamber please move into private session.
We're back in open session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Lukic.
Hello?
Thank you. The defense assert, as we have explained in our brief and in the first part of our closing argument, that all officers of the VRS and the SVK designated by the prosecution as direct perpetrators and members of the VJ at the time the crimes were committed were not within the chain of command of the VJ. No matter how hard they try to show that their status in the personnel centers tallies with the command chain of the VJ, they themselves have to admit that while they were on service in the VRS and SVK, they were not within the VJ chain of command.
If they're outside the VJ, then at the time when the crimes were committed, Perišić was not their superior. If there is no relationship of hierarchy between subordinate and superior, and we all know that that is one of the three essential elements of command responsibility. Now I'm going to move on to some of the direct evidence that shows about absence of control on Perišić's part over his alleged subordinates. Please assess all the evidence in its totality. I would like to deal with something now that Mr. Guy Smith mentioned yesterday, and that was the policy of the state.
The chamber can assure you the chamber will look at the entire evidence. The chamber can assure you that the chamber will look at the entire evidence. We've been reminded of this several times during the defense argument. We just want to make that assurance to you.
Nisam. Zahvaljujem na ovoj podršci. Ja mislim.
Thank you for your support. I think that I speak for all the participants in the proceedings. I have this concern, I think we all have this concern, that we are trying to look at all of this together at a given point in time. I would like to point this out to you when assessing something that is called context. I spoke about that in my opening statement. When you look at a document, and you're probably going to say now that that is certainly what you're going to do, but it is important for us to say that documents always need to be looked at within context.
Thank you so much.
Sada bih pričao nešto oko tom.
Now, I would like to say something about this context of state policy as an important factor for assessing responsibility and facts. Although expert Malvin could not assist the court very much in explaining the general principles of command and control. In his methodology, he mentions in paragraph 2.1, could I please have that on the screen? P2772, page 4 in English, page 4 in BCS. He speaks of context. And he says that context is very important, as we have said, to assess the functioning of any chain of command.
I da na to utiču razni
and that there are many non-military factors that affect that. And he ends with a particular position that I would like to quote.
Sa sledećim.
And this is what he says.
Zapravo, komandovanje na najvišem.
Actually, command at highest level, strategic level, can never be isolated from governmental policy and direction. Thus, the exercise of command must always be viewed in the appropriate context. If motivation were to be understood, reasons, and desired and actual outcomes of the commander's decision.
Ja mislim da ste čuli prevod, tako da...
I think that you heard the interpretation, so you don't have to look at the rest in English on your screen, because we'd need to move on to the next page in English in that case.
E sada, u ovom predmetu mi imamo dokaze o komandu...
In this case, we have evidence related to command and control at the highest strategic level that is most directly linked to policy as such, political decisions, and top state leadership. Although the prosecution wishes to stop the positions of the state leadership of the FRY and their policy in the early stages of the war is something that was defined and unchanged, that was actually not the case. The evidence that they produced before you shows that at least from April 1993 and especially from the summer of 1994, there was a permanent and genuine wish of the state leadership of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia to stop the war, and that the leaderships of Republika Srpska and the Republic of the Serb Krajina, as well as their military leaderships, should accept the peace settlements offered by the international community, namely the contact group plan, as well as Plan Z4 pertaining to RSK, all the way up to the Dayton Accords. There's a great deal of evidence that points to this, and we dealt with part of it in our final brief. However, Your Honors, now we have the opportunity of referring to some of that evidence in open court. Evidence that shows unequivocally, on the one hand, the objective of the state leadership of the FRY to have the war ended, and on the other hand, this very important distinction between influence and what the prosecution wishes to portray as control. I know that you are going to assess all of that evidence within the context of the time frame involved. Let us first look at P778. In BCS, it is page 26, and in English, it is page 39. Very briefly. It is the 30th session, or rather, sorry, the 25th session of the Supreme Defense Council in August 1994.
After
the contact group plan was rejected. I'm providing the context. And that was after the FRY imposed sanctions against Republika Srpska. President Milošević is speaking about the relationship between the two political and military leaderships. Very briefly, the first paragraph. Yes. Therefore, the war option is absolutely pointless. From a moral point of view, I don't think that we should be beating ourselves in the chest as to who is amongst us a better Serb or a Serb by profession. We have had that over the past few years, but now you can find such people by the dozen. Now, page 41 and 42, again, it is Milošević who is the speaker.
Kraj.
The end. The end of the page.
Milošević kaže, to su...
This is what Milošević says. All of that is being put at a risk by a fixation that, quotation marks, perhaps 1 or 2/100ths of the territory could be acquired if the plan is rejected, end of quote. In my view, says Milošević, this is not worth prolonging the agony of war, of sanctions against Yugoslavia, and all other difficulties that could be placed on the shoulders of the Serbian people. Finally, page 44, again it is Milošević. It is page 29 in English. This is his conclusion. Therefore, the answer to this question is we must apply all possible forms of pressure towards having the peace plan accepted. It is out of the question that any reasonable person could opt for a continuation of war and the drawing of Yugoslavia into the war conflict. This was the major and most important danger, the drawing of Yugoslavia into the armed conflict, which we managed to escape. Milošević said all of that at that session. P779 is what I'd like to call up now. This is the 28th session of the Supreme Defense Council. The 2nd of November 1994 is the date. In English, it is page 32, and in BCS, it is 30.
Kaže Milošević.
This is what Milošević says. It is not the question anymore whether they can accomplish that goal. He is talking about the leadership of Republika Srpska. May I remind you of the context? November 1994, the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia imposed sanctions on Republika Srpska. This is what Milošević says. We told them on time that it was impossible to achieve the goal that they wanted to achieve, and that politics is the art of the possible and not the art of the impossible. It is simply impossible for the international community to go along with the fact that 2/3 of the population, including Croats and Muslims, are crammed into less than half of the territory. Then Perišić, General Perišić, page 34 in English, the very same transcript, page 32 in BCS.
Kontekst je oko pokušaja.
The context is the attempts to influence the leadership of Republika Srpska to accept and support the plan of the contact group. Now, in that context, General Perišić says, I suggest that we try to persuade them, if we still can do anything, the references to the leadership of Republika Srpska. Otherwise, they will face a complete disaster. It is not only that they will face it, but such a situation will have dramatic consequences for the Serbian and Montenegrin peoples. Now, look at another short dialogue from that session. In English, it is page 36, and in BCS 34.
Perišić kaže, general.
This is what General Perišić says.
Bilo bi dobro kada bi bilo koji...
It would be good if any factor could get involved that has any influence on them in order to try to bring them to reason. And then Milošević says, Momo, the army is the sole factor that has influence on them, and you know very well that you cannot do anything there. When you read this entire document, you will see what this refers to and who. But it is clear that it is the Army of Republika Srpska. Then Perišić says, Mr. President, at least we can invite them and we can try to persuade those people before this audience. There are multiple reasons why I'm asking you to do it. Milošević says, Ko Mladić, I think we can talk again. And then, Your Honors, this is P734, or rather 743. I'm not going to ask to have it displayed. Sorry, P743. Those are the conclusions from that session. And I suggest that when you analyze the evidence, you look at conclusion number 4, where an unequivocal decision is being made on the basis of this dialogue. And it says, caution the main staff of the Army of Republika Srpska and try to bring General Mladić in for a talk. That is the end of that conclusion.
Pogledajte sada za trenutak dokazni...
Please look at P794 for a moment, the 31st session. Let us look at the context, the 18th of January 1995. We have heard a great deal of evidence about that. The officers of the VRS no longer receive their salaries, sanctions were imposed, and there is a lot of discussion at that session about how the leadership of Republika Srpska can be persuaded to accept the plan of the contact group. Let us see what President Milošević says, page 50 in English, and BCS is 45. It's just a short sentence.
Drugi pasus, poštovani suve.
Second paragraph, Your Honors. These are Milošević's words. However, on the other hand, the army should not be a prisoner of a crazy policy there led by that leadership. That is something that Perišić tried to explain to them on several occasions, as we all did, but unfortunately it was unsuccessful. Can we now adjourn for the day 3 minutes early? Because I will be discussing the same topic, but I'd have to call up a different document, so perhaps this would be a good time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lukic. We'll then adjourn for the day and come back tomorrow at 9 o'clock, same court adjourn.
All right. We will